And we're back with Truth Unrestricted, the podcast that is creating and interpreting the language of the disinformation age. I'm Spencer, your host, back again today with Patrick. How you doing, Patrick?
I'm doing good, Spencer. How are you doing?
Yeah, it's hot. I'm not gonna lie, it's hot. We're gonna try to
Yeah.
keep this episode 2 just as long as it needs to be.
Okay.
Yeah, but unfortunately, I do have just a little bit of housekeeping I need to do here. So I got asked to put to answer the question of what am I doing with this podcast? Like, what is it? Can I put it into describe it a little better? So I'm gonna give that a shot right now. So it's gonna work into what we're actually doing with this episode.
Okay.
So what I think we're doing in our world, our greater world, our politics and our culture and many other things is we think we're really good at explaining things and communicating, and it's a mixed bag actually.
hmm
But there are a lot of what I call ubiquitous ideas.
Okay.
Ubiquitous is a big fancy word, $5 word. It means that it's sort of there all the time, and you never mention it, right?
Sure. Everyone takes it
Right.
for granted.
Yeah, everyone takes it for granted. That's right. So when we get into a lot of conversations, when a lot of conversations about a lot of very important topics occur, I see very often that people give an answer of course. Like, of course, that's the answer. Of course, we're going to do that. Of course, this is the thing that should be done about that. Of course.
hmm
And to me, this is a failing. This is essentially it's logical bypass, right? It's going to appeal to existing biases rather than attempting to define what those biases are and root them out. It says to the listener, whatever you think was the right answer. And this is, of course, an answer that a lot of politicians like
This
because
is,
they
of
want to
course,
give,
an answer.
yes, of course, as an answer. Like, and there comes in a couple different forms, right? But
Okay.
you'll see it around. You'll see people say, "Of course, that's the right answer." And I don't want to pick one particular issue out, but of course that's true. Of
hmm
course it's right that all those terrible things have to happen. Of course this
hmm
is right. And that's what it's doing. It's giving the people who listen to that answer the reason to put their own answer in place of that. It's sort of like a blank check for their ideas and their biases and everything else, which is why we say about some very terrible sets of ideas about politicians is it weaponizes very bad ideas and very bad biases, right? Because this is happening more and more often where people just say, well, of course that's true. Of course. So my thought is that maybe we should um, try to not be so sloppy with our thinking and our communication and attempt to not just say, of course, but actually answer the question of what these things really mean. What is the answer that is meant instead of course? But then, in addition, try to understand what other people mean when they say, "Of course,"
hmm
because I mean, other forms of course is, oh well, that's common sense. That's just common sense. But no one ever tries to define what common sense is. That's the same as saying, "Of course, that's true," right?
hmm
So that's what we're gonna do today. Today's episode is about ethnonationalism. It's another big $5 word. It's actually portmanteau of two words. Super portmanteau is also another $5 word. I have an aunt who doesn't like when I use big words, so I'm going to use all these big words just to annoy her. Um, yeah. So, any thoughts so far, Patrick?
Yeah. Thinking about, of course,
Yeah.
as a tool that someone may use in their speech, especially if it's for something persuasive, I think is one of those things where the speaker is getting the listener to lean in because
Mm.
they're making this presumption, and
A
they
presumption of
either have,
agreement, right?
yeah, and
Yeah.
that presumption of agreement is what then allows them to carry on. Only now the idea goes on a little further because they're acting like it's a foundation. So
Right.
you'll have two different scenarios. One would be the intimate conversation where you and I are having a conversation,
Mhm.
and you're telling me something, and then you say, "Of course, such and such," and I, as the listener, would have that responsibility to either the good faith of trying to have the best conversation, or at least abiding by my voice if I did not feel that of course was something that stood self-evident, right? But then you have that absolute lack of being able to, for the listener to use and articulate their voice and to seize that moment and say, hold on, that's not of course, when you have somebody speaking to a broader audience,
Mhm.
right? So I
Yeah.
think that that's where, if I want to say that to you in conversation, I don't think that's a foul, because I would hope that you have the agency and you're self-possessed enough to say, hold on a second, that's not of course. But if it is of course, then we've saved a bunch of time by
Right.
relying on the consensus assumption, right? But yeah, I
Right.
think it's
But I
something that.
think that I'm going to try to not use it as a term. It is sort of a turn of phrase that we use to carry into a sentence kind of thing as a response. So it has that meaning as well.
Mhm.
I'm going to try to not use it. Good, we'll see how well that goes. I've also tried to not use the word thing as much. I think I've succeeded at reducing the number of times I use the word thing
Go on.
when I'm on the podcast and trying to explain something that's a little more technical, and then use a generic term like thing, this thing over here.
Okay.
But I don't know if I've could completely, scoured all instances of it, because I'm not perfect. But it is a drive. It is an effort to be more precise with what I'm thinking, what I'm expressing, and it's also an ask for other people to, it's a laying the gauntlet down, or laying the challenge down to, like, also other people maybe live up to this same standard that maybe we set here.
Mhm.
That's part of this.
And I would hope
So
anybody listening, if they
yeah,
felt like you were using the term thing, but you were glossing over something that should have had more attention, that's when you as a
yeah,
listener need to write in and say,
yeah.
oh, I
Stick it to
challenge
me.
this assumption, or at
Yeah.
least elaborate, right? And
You
then that would
missed
be,
this. You screwed this up. You
yeah.
you didn't do this very well. Yeah. Absolutely. And the place to do that is truthunrestricted@gmail.com. Yeah. So we're gonna get on with ethno-nationalism today because I am cooking in this little room with the door closed. Um, so I did a bunch of looking into this and reading about it and thinking about it a lot, and I discovered actually that I can't explain ethno-nationalism and get into this without explaining another term first.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a whole thing. So
This is all new to me.
that term that we're going to explain first is collective identity.
Okay.
Right. So, I wasn't there, Patrick, but I'm certain it's true that you were once a baby, and you were slowly gaining sort of awareness and sentience. You were self-awareness at first. At some point in your, toddlerhood, you came aware that you were a unique individual person, and that was sort of the first layer. And then after that, you became aware. After you knew about yourself, you became aware that other people around you existed, and they were actually people that you interacted with. And that was sort of like this beginning of yourself, your identity, and your first as an individual, and then later as not just an individual, but an individual that interacts with other people,
Mhm.
and that the other people are not you, but they are connected to you. They're sort of part of you. And that was sort of your first introduction to being part of a collective identity, was like your family, the people
Mhm.
raising you, right?
Mhm.
Um, and this is true for everyone, generally speaking, except for, Picos Bill, who's raised by wolves, right? But I guess he still did. He felt that the wolves were part of his collective identity. So I guess it's still true. Babies raised by wolves feel
The
that the
wild boy
wolves
of
are part of
Aveyron.
their
Yeah.
collective identity. Yeah. Um, so for, our ancestors, this collective identity, sociological term, but all of the human sciences, social sciences get involved here. In the far, we feel, science feels that we're not able to sustain collective identity that's very large without communication technologies. So we were very much like, like wolves probably also feel the same thing. They're social animals. All social animals we feel this collective identity. Chimpanzees are in groups, and gorillas in groups, etc. Orangutans, all of the great apes have some level of collective identity. They have their social group that they're in, and then they don't really like the outsiders, or the newcomer comes into the group and they don't trust them at first because they're not one of them, right? So as humans and our ancient ancestors developed technology, first we came up with spoken language. This is a big deal, great big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Huge advantage for us. Other creatures have some kind of a sound system where they have sounds, and they have some kind of a, we think some kind of a language that we haven't fully decoded, but it's not nearly as expressive as ours, at least to the best of our knowledge. Spoken language allowed us to get collective identities that were larger, which meant that our groups could be larger.
Mm-hmm.
We could talk to each other, and we could come to a greater arrangement of trust between each other based on words that we could use, that we'd understand between each other and everything else. And almost all of our collective identities at that point were probably hardwired to who could understand us. Like, the next tribe over, if they spoke a different language, you're definitely never going to form a collective identity that includes them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So fast forward, took us a very long time to get past that. I don't know, 20-ish thousand years ago, whatever, we developed writing. It's a big leap forward, another big leap forward in communications, right? But this allowed us to do things. I mean, this is the story of human civilization. We were able to form groups that were larger when we could speak to each other, but we were limited. This limited us still to the number of people that we could sort of have in our groups. But with writing, we could suddenly have a much larger collective identities, right? Where we could have like rules and laws and signs that you might have, keep off the grass or whatever it is, and you could have all kinds of other things. The most important of these were not really signs. I joke about that, signs, keep off the grass. They were probably more like letters between important people in communities. So, you're in a town and there's the next town over that's a, 2 days walk or whatever, and you can send letters between them, and the leader of yours could have letters to them, and you could understand each other, and you could form, probably actually get mad at each other and have an army march over there to take them off. But empires formed alongside our ability to write, because even in like conquering, if you're a powerful town and you conquer the towns over there, ruling them is a huge hassle, because you can't, writing allows you to rule them in a way that not writing doesn't, right? You can pass, orders. You can put someone in charge there, and you can write a letter to them, make sure these things are happening, and send that over there. And you can, it's an authoritarian tool, but it greatly allowed humans to build these cultures. And these cultures were in some ways very terrible, oppressive regimes, but it is nonetheless the way humans did it in history. So empires happened. It was great for some and terrible for almost everyone else. Eventually we developed the printing press. The printing press, another huge leap forward in our ability to form collective identities. So even with empires, the people that really had a sense that they were a part of a collective larger than themselves, much larger than themselves, were probably only the people in charge.
Mm-hmm.
For a very long time, common people didn't really care all that much about who was sort of like ruling them.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to till the soil in some part of, I don't know, France or whatever, and it's the Burgundians who are ruling you this week, and it's the Franks that are ruling you next week, it doesn't really matter all that much. As long as you get to keep planting the crops so you can feed off of them, and you got to pay some food to this soldier, that soldier, whatever, whatever, you're still living, or, close enough to. It's a hard scrabble life. But for most of the common folk through much of that period, they didn't really care. Their collective identity was just their own village or their own, because they're not traveling as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
But with the printing press, we developed a much greater ability to develop collective identities with newspapers. You could read. Once you learn to read, you could read and you could understand that the people at the far edge of the empire were also connected to you. They had lives and troubles and this sort of thing that affected you, and vice versa. And so with the printing press and the ability to communicate on a much larger scale that way, we were able to develop a larger awareness of our world and who was sort of like what you might say in it with us when the chips were down, right? If your, you know, area, I'm avoiding using the word nation because they really didn't have them yet. They had empires, they had city states, they had collections of villages. They didn't have nations. We often refer to them as nations when we look backward in the past, but that's actually not true. They didn't have nations. They came to an awareness of this that led to a lot of fundamental changes in how society was put together, that eventually led to the idea of nations forming. So one of the key moments in nation building was the writing down of the Magna Carta. That was sort of like 1,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It set forth a series of rights that are supposed to be shared by people. It wasn't universally applied and sort of, I mean, ad hoc, and sometimes it was completely ignored. So, I mean, it was a long road. It was a long road to building nations. But eventually, there were, after many, many wars in Europe especially, they had one called the 30 Years' War. And at the end of that one was what was called the Peace of Westphalia. And in this carried some ideas that are said to be foundational for what came to be the ideas that formed nations. So one of these was an agreement between like common folk and the aristocrat, like the nobility, of how they would interact, what rules the nobility would not place upon people. And one of those was that the people could practice any religion they wanted. It didn't have to be the same religion as the lord who ruled over them. This is a wild idea that no one had ever really kind of thought of. Everyone just thought, okay, we have that lord is whatever, he's a certain denomination of Christianity, I don't know, whatever, is Protestant or whatever. That's a Protestant region because that lord is Protestant, and all the people there must be Protestant, right? Because they're all, but some of them are like, no, we want to be Catholic or whatever the other thing, flavor was. And so the lord would be like, no, you have to be this one because that's me, and I'm the one who has all the weapons. And this was part of the layers of conflict that were going on in a lot of these parts of the world. But the commoners only got the backbone to even think that they could impose these sorts of rules and demand them because they were getting a larger sense of who else around them was also mad about these things. If every single one of them in their every little village only thought, oh, it's only our village that's mad about this, we'll never have enough power to tell the Lord that we don't want this. Every single one of them, as they had for many generations, would just accept the condition. But they were getting a larger collective identity about their world, and in doing so, this led to fundamental changes in their relationship with the people who were ruling over them. And this was about 1650-ish, I think. This led to more ideas, and these led to what are now nations. So we'll stop in there, check in with you, Patrick. How is this set of ideas setting in? Is collective identity an idea that you have some chance of understanding now?
Yeah. I think it's important. I mean, what you said rings true to me, especially where you kind of walk through the steps. And I think about, the fact that verbal language, to be able to create that collective identity, verbal language allowed us to communicate beyond the person we were communicating to in that moment, because that person could carry our words or will to
Right.
another person. And so that's where you see the first instance of reach, right? Where the communication now expands to encompass the people that understand it. And then you have the written language, as you said, where it takes it from active dynamic communication to passive persistent communication. So a person could write that letter, and now the reach is as far as that letter goes, and it also adds that fixed rigidity where the contents of the letter don't change,
Yeah,
right? And
you're
the
sure
printing,
that the messenger isn't going to screw up your message. Yeah,
yeah. And so
right.
at that point, when we're carving stuff in clay tablets, the labor cost, material cost
Yeah,
to create these writings means that only the elite caste or the decision makers are even participating in this. The regular, peasantry are not. They're not going to encounter any of that. But the printing press, like you said, just represents a technological leap forward where the efficiency of that reach now means that the saturation in that zone of reach means that kind of now these ideas can fall into anyone's hands because the barrier, the cost of creating those
yeah.
ideas is so low. And then, of course, you can carry it
Teaching
forward to
everyone to
modern.
read was never an idea that caught on until the printing press as well, right? It
Mhm.
would be immensely costly to teach everyone inside any given empire how to read, and so they only got select people would learn how to read, and that was it, right?
Well, it also created the first surplus of these writing materials, because the printing press, when they're printing these things, it's not necessarily they're printing a book for this person and a book for this person. They're like,
Yeah,
let's
yeah.
try and get these out there. So now you have written
Would have a
materials
market for
laying
books. Yeah,
around available, right?
right.
Where even if the people don't know them, somebody's going to be like, well, what are they looking at when they see that? And then you just kind of fast forward to modern times, and you have the internet where
Well,
the reach
well,
of
yeah, I was gonna
everything is
say
global.
we had a couple steps between the printing press and the internet, right? We had radio, and then
Hmm.
we had television.
Yeah.
These were big steps as well that led to still
Sound,
assisted in
images.
like nation forming.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, but which is this collection of technologies explains why more or less every part of the world that has people in it is a nation now.
Hmm.
And sort of then looking backward, why so many people who don't understand history sort of think that there's always been nations, because they don't understand this link between the communication technology and the ability to see yourself as being
A member.
similar enough with people from a far ways away and still part
Yeah.
of you, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's get into this. So ethno-nationalism, as I said, is a portmanteau. It's two words smushed into one: ethnicity and nationalism. So what is an ethnicity is the first question, right? I got this from dictionary.com. I got it from there because it's brief, not like the Wikipedia article, which is lengthy. I'm not here to read Wikipedia articles. I think they're fine-ish. But I think I'll read this definition real quick, and then I'll tell you what I think is wrong with it. From dictionary.com, an ethnicity is an ethnic group, a social group that shares a common and distinctive culture, religion, language, or the like. Um, yeah, generally speaking, this is true. However, I'll add that ethnicity ethnicity tends to be something that we describe other people as. Very rarely do we refer to our own sort of distinctive culture, religion, language, etc., as an ethnicity, as just one
True.
flavor of the many things.
Yeah.
So in that way, it can become a problematic word. It can become almost like a socially acceptable method of like categorizing people, which
Othering.
and othering, right? So like recognizing their differences in like a neutral and like supposedly unbiased way, where it can be absolutely biased, right? Um, and so I think also they can be ways to like smuggle into a conversation or like otherwise like whitewash racist ideas. just by referring to them, and instead of their race, it's their ethnicity, right? And you sort of soften the language in that way and make it acceptable. And that's one way that this has happened. It's not that it happens in every instance of the use of the word ethnicity, but it does
Mhm.
happen. And so I think these are important notes to think about when we think about the word ethnicity. Also worth noting is that ethnicity is one of our favorite things now. It's a social construct, right? It only exists because of the way people socially interact. It's not like an objective thing. Some people will say it absolutely is an objective thing. Yeah, because sometimes their language is different or whatever. Some people do have a different religion, right? But we don't need to other them or otherwise like categorize them in some other way because of it. We don't need to do that. We only do that because, that's doing that is part of the use of the word ethnicity. We could just call them people. They're just people who happen to have that religion or whatever. But we more often we refer to them as an ethnicity because we want to categorize them in these ways.
I would say that's true. My only caution around that idea is that sometimes I feel it has some utility when we're dealing with marginalized or like segments that require some sort of protection, right?
Oh,
To
right.
have some sort of
True.
language around that to identify
Ethnicity
why
is
that's the case.
definitely like a term, like an anthropological term that
Mhm.
you'll see a lot in papers and stuff that anthropologists will write, and they aren't using it in a way that's like sort of trying to soften their inner racist or anything like that. They're
Right.
not using
Yes.
it in a
Yeah.
way
Yeah.
that right. So it has a great many uses to refer to a collection of ideas or a way to categorize people. But
Mhm.
very often, people who aren't scientists, and the vast majority of us are not scientists, many people are using it in a way that is meant to categorize people for a non-complementary purpose.
Right.
Um, and that's I'm calling that ball as I see it. That's just how I see it.
I think that's true.
Yeah. So, what is a nation then? I had this big deal where I mentioned that we didn't really have nations until a certain point. What is a nation? So a nation is like a form of a collective social structure that
Mhm.
has a recognized set of rights for its citizens, as well as a recognized territory in which those citizens exist. These are true concepts. So, like, we don't think of it a lot, but empires didn't always even have maps. They didn't even, we in history we study ancient times and ancient empires and this sort of thing by the use of maps to have a pictorial understanding of the shape of the world they lived in and the region they covered or whatever. But that's not always true for the people who lived in those empires. They didn't necessarily have maps. Some did, some did
Mhm.
not. They just were like, we own that over there, or we own that and the thing beyond it. You carry down this road, everything this road leads to is ours. We
Their
built this road
understanding is
because we
limited by
wanted to
their
go there to
movement.
conquer those people, kind of thing, and that
Mhm.
was the purpose.
Mhm.
And yeah, that's our stuff now. They pay us to exist. That's sort of the arrangement with that empires had. Um, and they didn't necessarily have maps. They're just like, your stuff is ours now. We don't need a map. We
Mhm.
don't care about maps. We don't, most of the majority of empires weren't doing it to compare, the size of the area they covered versus some other previous empire. Some of them were. Some of them definitely were. But actually, most of them weren't. They were just like, we want more stuff. They have stuff. Let's go get it. And
Yeah,
that's as
they're
simple
in
as it
that
was.
direction. Let's
Yeah.
go.
The stuff that comes here
Yeah.
from the trade route comes from there. We want
Yeah.
that stuff. We'll go over there because we know that the trade route, the road leads over there. We'll go get it.
Yeah.
We have a big army. We're pretty sure it's
Gently
bigger than
ooze
theirs.
across the landscape.
Yeah, yeah. We represent it as like zones of influence kind of thing,
Mhm.
but it doesn't. It did. They didn't really have borders in the same way that we have borders now,
Right.
because we have we were able to make all these maps because of the printing press, and we're able to have a UN, which is another sort of a level of collective identity where we can recognize that our nations, each of our nation, the nation that we live in, is represented in there. There's a couple nations that aren't represented. We're not going to go into that today. It's not a perfect system either, obviously, but the whole purpose of the UN is that everyone there recognizes everyone else and the territory between them. So the few nations that aren't there, a couple of them are not invited because they don't recognize what would be called like the map, the common understanding of what the world map looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't recognize the borders, and so they're not playing nice, and maybe they don't show up to the party. But we're not going to get into that today. That's a whole different thing. But yeah, the idea is that they recognize, and since we've had the UN, it's not the only reason why this has occurred this way, but since we've had the UN, we have had uh, fewer sort of like border conflicts between nations. We've still had a lot of conflicts. We've still had a lot of killing. We've had nations that are not fully cohesive. We've had civil wars between them. We've had genocidal things going on. There's still a lot of bad things in the world, and but there's been fewer of these sort of conflicts like we had in like World Wars I and II, where like all your stuff is going to be ours once we cross this border and move the border and just subsume your nation into ours and many other nations into ours. I mean, that has calmed down. I mean, also the atomic weapon thing has also been a factor, uh, and a couple other factors as well. Trade, increased trade, and everything has also been a thing. But yeah, we once we all recognize where the borders are. It's harder to just like pretend the border's never been there, right? Which is the thing that definitely used to happen. People used to say, "No, this is always our stuff. It's always been our stuff. It just you took it from us for a while, and now we're taking it back."
Mm-hmm.
That idea has gone away to some extent, at least. Hopefully, it goes away permanently, but we'll see. But that's what nations are: is there these understandings between the people who are organizing those nations and the people that are in them. And I do say that there are formal laws or whatever. They're not always followed in those nations. Some of them have a high degree of corruption, which is essentially unspoken agreements to not follow those laws and give preferential treatment to some people. Um, yeah, that's true. Um, but the idea for them is there. There's a reason why we have the word corruption and that it exists as a thing, that kind of unspoken agreement to like not follow those laws, is because those laws exist. I mean, we've moved those ideas far enough that we have to talk about the corruption in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we have this ethnicity and we have nationalism. So when we put them together, we get the idea that ethno-nationalism is then sort of the idea that each nation should represent one ethnicity.
Okay.
Okay, right. And that each ethnicity should have a nation to represent it.
Oh.
Well, okay, right. Oh, right. I mean, that's sort of a way to put it, right? And to some people who have a highly ordered sense of the world, they come to the idea, well, it sort of makes sense. A place for everyone and everyone in their place, right? Sort of like their desk is maybe ultra organized and they have a specific spot for the blue pens and another specific spot for the red pens, and then maybe they have black pens and they're in another specific spot for the black pens, and felt pens also go in a different spot than those other three, and everything has its own place, and everything's organized and tidy and neat. But humans don't really work this way, right? This idea doesn't account for a lot of really human things, which is like things like, I mean, just like wanderlust, right? The idea for people to just wander and go places out of curiosity would put them in places that aren't, the nation in which their ethnicity is the supreme.
But where they
Um,
still want their fundamental rights protected.
well, you know, we'll talk about that. I think people who sort of have feelings for and fall in love with people of other ethnicities are obviously that's a thing that happens between people, but it's a thing that is very naturally opposed by ethno-nationalism because all of a sudden you have a let's say you have a white person and you have a black person and they get married and then they have children. God forbid they have children, Patrick. They have children, then of course you're stuck because now you have to wonder what you're gonna say. We're gonna deport the black person. They belong somewhere else because they're of a different ethnicity, maybe. And then you say, well, okay, well maybe the white person goes with them, but where you're sending them is not really a white person's nation. So I mean, the ethnicity they have to stay here. But then the children, they're are you calling them white? Are you calling them
Mhm.
black? Are you right? So you get this whole thing where this makes ethno nationalists very uncomfortable, which is the one of the sort of sets of ideas that leads to people saying, well, maybe if this ethno-nationalism thing is a thing that we like, maybe these people of different races, they don't mix, they don't, white people don't marry black people. They also neither of those marry Asian people or whatever, and maybe none of them marry anyone from any of those Hispanic countries, which is also you know confusing because they're not really Spanish, but most of them anyway. Yeah, I mean that's that's an idea that flows naturally from ethno-nationalism, but maybe it again these humans who are just making human decisions are doing things that the ethno-nationalists sort of start to hate, right? Um, People who are displaced because of the predations of other more vicious humans is another factor in this, right? You have refugees, and often those refugees are refugees because people in other nations, authoritarian powers, or whatever, are themselves ethno-nationalists. They say, no, this nation is for the people of this place. One moment, Patrick. Okay, back. Sorry about that. Yeah, so we have people who are displaced by you know violent dictator X says only the people who fall within these certain parameters are belong in my nation, and everyone else needs to get out now. And then they armed guards come in and start shooting people, and then they leave in droves, right? Because they want to live. And those people inevitably have to go someplace else, and that place is usually also not a place that is filled with the people who have their ethnicity.
Mhm.
Um, and so we find actually when we look at it that we have many more ethnicities than we have nations, actually. Um,
That tracks.
yeah, yeah, it's there's a lot of different ways for people to live,
Mhm.
and that's essentially what we're saying with an ethnicity. This is a group of people who live a certain way, and if we were going to try to push them each into their own little pocket of the planet and have only them be there, we would start to have just many more nations is what we have, and many of them
Mhm.
would be much smaller. I mean, when we talk about ethnicity, we also very it's also a word that very greatly um, generalizes very often. I mean, from Canada's perspective, many people will refer to a person as having an African ethnicity. But that must be a great surprise to people who are in Africa who look at each other and say, we're the most diverse continent, ethnically speaking, on the planet. What are you talking about? There's tens of thousands, at least, of ethnicities in Africa. Maybe there's hundreds of thousands. I'm not even sure. I'm not an anthropologist, but there are at least many tens of thousands there. They don't see themselves as just being like one ethnicity. That's ridiculous, right? Or
Mhm.
even like three ethnicities or whatever. Uh, that's just blatantly false. We also do a lot of things like we'll say someone's like ethnically Chinese. China's not an ethnically monolithic country. it has many different ethnicities inside it. Any sufficiently large nation will. Also, many people refer to Canada as an ethnically sort of like white Western nation. That's also a great surprise and point of contention with all the Indigenous people here, who also aren't one ethnic group.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't speak one language. Many of them didn't even know each other existed until we came across with all these other communication devices and tracked them all down and everything else. Um, yeah, this whole idea that each ethnicity should have only one nation and each nation should only have one ethnicity, it leads to all these other bad ideas. Um, how am I doing so far? Am I making sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Good. That's it. That's all you got. Is that? Uh huh.
I don't know. I was just trying to think of like examples, and it's just like the first easiest one that comes to mind would be something like the Ku Klux Klan, right? Like
Yeah.
their idea of what a nation's supposed to look like or what they're fighting
Right.
against is very cut and dry, right? But
Yeah.
it resonates what you say, because that's kind of why when you said, well, ethno-nationalism means that there should be a nation for, what was it, a nation for every no, an ethnicity for every nation.
Yeah.
So
One
to say that,
ethnicity for
like,
every
yeah,
nation and
should be
every
white Canada or something, but to have a
yeah.
nation for every ethnicity, whoa, that's
Well,
really
yeah.
splitting all the
But
available
what's usually sort of spoken under the breath or never mentioned at all is that whatever ethnicities don't make it in the sort of great clash to have,
mhm,
you know, to decide which ethnicity rules each nation, well, that they're the ones that's very survival of the fittest, right? It's very
mhm,
shrug off. Well, I guess they didn't make it.
yeah,
Uh, you know, we'll go on without them, kind of thing.
a way
Uh,
for the larger ethnicities to devour, to justify
Yeah,
devouring the
that's
smaller
usually
ones.
another idea that comes forth with this is like um, another sort of idea that comes with this is that um, ethno-nationalists will come to an idea inside their minds that maybe it's not possible to like rid their own particular nation of all of the what might be called to them the non-preferred ethnicities. But what they do come to the conclusion of is that there can be only one ethnicity in charge.
Mm,
And
yes.
by that, then they can never allow one of the other ethnicities to be in charge,
Mhm.
which is where you get ideas like the Great Replacement Theory. I think we mentioned once before. Do you remember mentioning
It's not ringing a bell,
hearing about?
sorry.
Okay. The Great Replacement Theory is the idea that it's an idea in the United States, but it's also an idea in a few other places that uh, white people are going to be outnumbered eventually by people of other ethnicities,
Mhm.
and therefore white people will no longer be the primary political power in the United States, that they're being replaced.
Hmm.
It's in some circles it's extremely explicit. There was a you may have remembered there was a uh, an event called the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017, the first year of Trump's first term in office. And it was a lot of things happening there. There was sort of also in Charlottesville was sort of the rise and coming out party for the anti-fascists who knew about it and showed up in droves to tell them that they couldn't just march the streets unimpeded. Um, there were clashes. There was a white nationalist there who drove his car into a crowd of people and killed a woman. But the night before the rally, there was a group of white men who were all dressed very, very similarly, not quite identically, but very, very similarly. They were all carrying tiki torches and they were marching through the streets of Charlottesville, Virginia in the nighttime, chanting literally the Jews will not replace us.
Mm.
Yeah, this was sort of a view of things to come as we were. Some people were, and maybe still are, convinced that this whole thing about Trump and the idea that he's emboldening bad people is maybe just a bunch of fluff or whatever. This is directly contradicted by the events of Charlottesville, and that particular flavor of ethno-nationalism is what's called white Christian nationalism. So it carries with it the idea that the United States should be a Christian nation, that it was founded on Christian principles. There's a commentator in the States. Why can't I remember anyone's name? Um, his name is Ben Shapiro. That's his name. I just had to look it up. Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro is a Jewish man who, in almost every respect, follows the list of white Christian nationalist talking points almost right down to the letter, except for the fact that he's Jewish. But he will modify the language that they say to suit his own thing to wedge himself in there. He'll say that he won't say that it's that the United States was built on Christian values. He'll say they're Judeo-Christian values, which is to exclude any other contribution that was ever had. I mean, the Continental Congress, which was a fundamental part of the ideas that were put forward for the founding of the United States, included a large number of indigenous people. I believe there was the Huron and the Iroquois were both there. They were both invited. They both sent delegations, multiple people each, to this Continental Congress. Many of their ideas were included in a lot of the ideas of how the United States was shaped. The idea that indigenous people were just not included and it's only Judeo-Christian values is already an insult to many of those people. Also, the things that happened after it was founded, where they just sort of, the genocides and the pushing them off the land and everything else, that was also really bad for them. Um, but that's also part of this idea that they felt that this land, the mass that they were meaning to occupy, was only for the white folk, right?
Mm-hmm. The Christians.
Yeah, only for the God fearing. And that this, if I were going to say anything, I would say that maybe the United States was founded on ethno-nationalist principles, almost more than anything else. And a fair number of Canadians also follow this. They also nod along when you speak these words into form, and they think they go, well, sure. There are some other people here, but obviously the white people are in charge, right? And we're going to still be in charge. And if we keep bringing other people in here, maybe we won't be in charge, and then there'll be a problem because it's unclear what that problem will be. Except that it will just be that it'll be run by them. It'll be their rules or something. Except that we have a set of rules for how we interact with whoever's in charge and what rules will be followed and how those rules are changed. And it's a system that doesn't give any preference to any ethnicity, any religion, any particular form of anything. And if anyone wanted to change it to some other set of rules, that's when our system comes into play, and we continue voting to vote for the people who would make it go the way we want it. That's how it works.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I think the idea that it won't be, strictly speaking, like white people in charge. Well, yeah, but no other single group is numerous enough to say that it's going to be them in charge either. This whole idea doesn't make any sense. It's not like there's, I don't know, Muslims are gaining ground at a speed that will overtake faster than, you know, Buddhists or Hindus or Sikhs or any other religion, even just counting the religions, right? Um, you know, we have people from so many countries here that we can't, it can't be said that any one of them, but the fears put in forward by ethno-nationalism say it doesn't matter which other one. The fears of ethno-nationalism say that it has to be white people in charge. That's all it is. It just you just have to not let go of the conch, as it were, right?
Right. And that's why the mixing of the races is such a threat, because then the descendants
Yeah, they
are
won't
more likely
know.
to vote against that kind of like
Or they,
prioritization.
yeah, if it goes time to separate or whatever, and you're like, well, how do you separate this child? Yeah, and there's been
Which is
times in our
ironic.
history where we were racist about that too, with
Yeah.
indigenous people and who had rights as an indigenous person, and
Well, we've seen portrayals of
yeah,
that idea about breeding them out, right? And it
yeah,
seems to be
there's been some
backfiring a bit,
people,
because
yeah.
the white complexion, or what have you, the phenotype is not the stronger of any
Well,
two.
the other problem with that is that humans were unhelpful in the project. I mean, even as just a sort of a social engineering concept, like let's say we're cruel and inhumane and we're gonna, I don't know, breed them out. And we, you know, someone did give that order once upon a time. However, once they had children and the children were half of one, half the other, they were still usually ostracized based on the unwanted half, and
Mhm.
therefore they identified more with the the parent that was from the ostracized culture because they were pushed out in the same way. And so essentially, you weren't breeding them out; they were breeding you out
Mhm.
by the fact that they were just identifying more with the other side. If they were accepted, but humans weren't like that. They were racist to the extent where they weren't accepting them
Mhm.
by and large. So it was a plan that was foiled by the cruel reality of people, the way that people are just cruel to each other in that way. We get no points for it. It's just the way it happened. Um,
Mhm.
yeah. Uh, I don't know. There's not a lot of bright spots in this whole thing, other than to say that I think the set of ideas that are put forward that stem from like the seed of ethno-nationalism, there's not a lot of good points there. There's not a lot of bright, shiny things that we should point to as like, well, that one's a good idea though. I don't see any in this. It's a
Well, ethnicity is kind of the most primitive form of classification. Like, you're basically just going on what are the physical traits, or the kind of like
yeah,
common activities, like
which is also
worship or
how it
whatnot.
generalizes a lot and also helps to become racist.
Yeah,
Language.
but it doesn't address or bring things like values and principles into the conversation and say these should be the elements of assessment, right? And so it's,
Yeah.
as we leave
Well,
that behind, the ideal that we espouse is that everybody should be judged on the basis of who they are, who they choose to be.
those are ideas, though. What you just mentioned are ideas that come forward in speech, like what the sorts of things that Ben Shapiro will say, for example, is that America was built on Judeo-Christian values almost exclusively, and that those values include, and he'll list them there. It's a strong work ethic,
Mhm.
implying that people of other ethnicities don't have that, didn't come in with that module included, right? Like
Well,
that.
what does he do when he finds someone who's not a Judeo-Christian that has a strong work ethic? Does his brain just frazzle?
He never finds one conveniently,
Yeah.
right? He
Oh, he's
never.
not going
Yeah.
to see it that way.
No,
Yeah.
no, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
He's
exactly.
gonna, yeah, he's gonna, yeah. But in this way, he'll even as a moment of what might be called, like we said before, mostly when people, we as humans, are using ethnicity, we're using it to categorize other groups other than our own group. In that respect, he is using it to categorize his own group, but it's to give the positive properties and traits onto his own group. to say we are so great, chest thumping, we did this because of our positive things that we did and contributed to the world. Or what, and he'll list them all. But I remember specifically him going on about hard work as being one of them, and I'm like, okay, dude, there's a lot of people hardworking in the world, right? Like, I've never seen, like, we have them here, like people who talk about people from the Philippines and how hard they work. Kind of puts a idea that these are Judeo-Christian values as a thing, right? Because I don't know, they're not. They're definitely not these white people that they're talking about. You know what I mean? Like Chinese people are also tend to be very hardworking. Japanese people also very hardworking. Many
A
other
lot of
people
white
very
people not
hardworking.
very hardworking.
Also, a lot of people in Africa are very hardworking.
Yeah.
Actually, they, for a long time they weren't using the same technologies we were using, but that hasn't mattered. They're catching up at a remarkable rate, right? There's an idea put forward by someone that the other nations, as they catch up, are going to have to go through all the same sort of phases that the Western world did. But I don't understand why anyone takes those people seriously. Like, do they think that the African nations are going to struggle through a colonial age? They struggled through a colonial age already when Western nations colonized them.
Yeah.
Like, this whole idea doesn't make sense. They're not going to have to go through the development of car manufacturing business, stage or whatever. Like, they're not going to have to do that. They have cars. They bought them. They're producing them and selling them there all the time. They have smartphones. They're catching up really, really quickly. India didn't have to go through all those same stages. They caught up very, very quickly. They're going to put people on the moon in a not too long a time, I think, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense, the idea that they have to go through all this. And I think the idea that they have to go through all this is part of that othering. It's part of that idea that we sort of went through that, even though we didn't. We were born into this. Our grandparents and great grandparents, whatever, they kind of were a part of all that. But that we inherit it. But like, the idea that there was some hardship that led to us being here, and that it's not fair unless the other nations or other ethnicities and other nations that have other ethnicities, whatever, also go through similar hardship. And it's like, that doesn't make any sense. Why? Like, it doesn't matter. It's this weird, some kind of hazing we're going to put them through. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Let's just get them up to modern standards. Like, they'll learn it. They'll catch up. They're already learning it on their own. Like, it doesn't. Yeah.
That's why we model things that are successful.
Say that again?
We model things that are successful. So when we see somebody or an organization that has utilized a strategy to achieve a success, then we can model that for ourselves and say, how does that look if I do that same thing? Right? I don't have to go through every growing pain that that person or organization went through. I can say, what were the key success factors, and say, just apply that to how I'm doing it. And then modeling is kind of like, envisioning.
Because also every Western country or every Western company and corporation didn't have to reinvent how to have a corporate structure. They copied it off each other. The idea that they had to struggle through and develop this whole, reinvent the wheel and everything else is a bold-faced lie. It's obvious. They just copied each other. Anytime one of them had a better idea for how to structure it, the other ones immediately copied it and they carried on, right? I mean, why shouldn't all those other places copy us and catch up right away? How much better would the world be if they did? It would be way better.
Well, I mean, that's the infectious nature of innovation. Once it's
ideas are more important than anything else. Yeah. Okay. Well, as an idea, I'm calling ethnonationalism a very bad idea. If you don't think that's true, go ahead. Tell me about it. Tell me why you think. Come up and stump for ethnonationalism. Tell me about it. Yeah. Other than that, I think we'll sign off.
All right. Good
So,
talk.
Yeah. Till next time, Patrick.
Ciao.
Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel to get more content like this. Special thanks to Jeff Powell for the intro and outro music handcrafted with real guitars. Please send all feedback to truthunrestricted@gmail.com.